I have started the recording.
Wonderful. Thanks, Lily. It looks like my parents did something. I'm not sure, but they're gone now. And they're in Ohio, so I'm not close to them to show them how to get back on. My sister's there, so I don't know what happened. But they were on here. So that's why I asked you to record, just in case, because they wanted to see this.
Yeah. Let me see.
Oh, she's back. Hi, Mom. Can you see? Can you click your video?
Hear me now? I don't hear you. I still don't hear you. What do I do? Help! You are muted. You are muted.
Yes, we can hear you.
Unmute yourself.
I hear you now.
Can you hear me, Mom?
I can hear you now.
Okay, you can hear me. I was the one muted.
Oh, okay.
All right. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'll introduce everyone. The one with the same name, that would be my mom. Hi, Mom. And my dad is there as well.
Leave.
That's Roy and Nancy McCollister, my parents back in Canton, Ohio. Technology's fun. And so I'll introduce, I guess, everyone, because I know everyone here. So I just met Lily, and Lily Howard is the GA in MSP. What is that? Multicultural Services and Programs, yes? Everyone else, Erin is the LGBTQ plus GA for the Resource Center in MSP. Dr. Irving is the Executive Director. And Martha Reed, I don't know your title, but I know you're also in MSP and you are an expert on emotional intelligence. I think you're muted.
I'm the program coordinator.
Program coordinator, wonderful. And I think my partner Darlene is on here. She is muted and has her video, but she is here, Darlene Town. And then I have students here in my undergraduate social work class. I won't name them all. And then there's a few people on here that I may not know. And I'm wondering if Mary Quinlan?
Yes, miss, it's me.
And Mary is a friend of mine from high school. So how fun is this? This is wonderful. And I'm not sure Jade, I don't know if I know Jade. Hi, Jade.
I'm muted, sorry.
That's
I'm
okay.
the La Casita GA at MSP.
Oh, okay, wonderful. Well, it's great to see everyone, and I know everyone here, so that's also really wonderful. And I'm just really honored to be asked to speak for this endeavor for the Women's Resource Center. I've had an opportunity of working with both Dr. Irving and Professor Reed, and I have so enjoyed my first year at Indiana State University, working in many endeavors in collaboration with MSP. And tonight, what I'm going to share with you really is just my life's work, why I chose social work as my discipline of practice, what inspired me, and hopefully what I'll share with you tonight is deeply inspiring, but yet also very emotional. And so I'm hoping that, what I'm able to share with you can also inspire you to take action in your own lives in a social work type of capacity, because that is my discipline and what I'll be sharing with you. So many of my students have already seen a lot of the work that I've done. So I am going to first start with just a little background on who I am that you might not know about. So I'm from Canton, Ohio, and born and raised there. And I spent about 15 years at the University of Akron School of Social Work. I received my undergraduate there as well as my graduate program. And that's my dog, Lily. One second. These are the joys of working from home, right? This is Lily, everyone. Say hi. Hi, Lily. She sees intruders at the door or something. So I got to calm her down just for a moment. So anyway, I spent about 15 years at the University of Akron School of Social Work, and my graduate degree was in macro social work. And I'm going to open this up to the students that are here because I want them to show you everything they know. What's the difference between macro social work and micro social work? To all those students out there.
Macro is on a bigger level of trying to change systems in society.
And then what's micro?
And that would be like on a smaller level of like individual therapy or counseling.
Wonderful, thanks, Catherine. So yeah, I knew early on that I was an individual that, really saw big picture. In social work practice, I was working in a residential treatment center. And I was working with, hold on a second, I'm really sorry. Okay, so I had to take her outside because she was not going to stop barking. So anyway, picking up where I left off. So I worked in residential treatment in juvenile detention. And at the time they were doing what's called My Brother's Keeper. And it was a positive peer culture type of program. And what I noticed was that a lot of the kids that came into the program had similar traumas and backgrounds, and many of them had families that were not involved in their treatment process. And so when we would send the kids back to their homes, we would find that they weren't successful and recidivism was high, and they would come back into the system. And so then I really started to examine the systems of care and trying to really dig deeply into the program processes of what was going on and what kinds of modalities were we using. And early, I started to see some disproportionality issues. I also saw that there was a lack of services for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgendered kids. And I really became an advocate very early. This would have been around the years 2000, 2001, right around 9/11, and started advocating in my community in Akron for an LGBTQ youth program, and started the very first one in Akron, Ohio. And this was a huge endeavor during the time, and I don't know how many of you remember just nationally what the news was like around 2000, 2003, where youth were trying to take kids to their same-sex partners to high school proms, and it was blown up on the media about school systems not allowing this to happen and being very discriminatory about it. Well, I put together a coalition and we started to advocate to the school boards and ask for gay-straight alliances. And we were able to establish 2 of those. And we put on a youth prom for the LGBTQ teens in our area. And over 70 kids came to this endeavor, which was really huge. It was a really big thing. And there were a lot of social service agencies that were involved. And this was during a time when there were no social service agencies in Akron, Ohio either for youth, and there still isn't, right? We all know that. There still is very limited services, especially here in Terre Haute. But they were even less back then, and that's almost 17, 18 years ago. And so that led into my advocacy work and wanting to be a macro practitioner. And what I saw in macro practice was this need for social justice. And my profession is social work. And if you really look at the history of social work or the history of any, type of health and human service oriented discipline, you're going to see some issues of systemic racism and systemic oppression. And this was something that I really started to see in my graduate program. This would have been around 2005 and 6. I was working in child welfare services. And I noticed that there were a lot of workers who had experienced a death of a child on their caseload or a death of a parent on their caseload, and then being very stigmatized for the emotional reactions that they had, to the point where people would repress, their feelings about things and were afraid to come forward. So I decided to do my master's thesis on peer recovery support and creating a panel for individuals to be able to debrief trauma, and started studying secondary trauma stress and self-care, the need for self-care. So this was back in 2005 and 6. The other major issue that I had in child welfare services was disproportionality. So the majority of the kids that we were servicing were Black and people of color, and the majority of the social workers were white. And so there was a cultural issue and problem of, not understanding how to best serve families. And then I started looking at this globally. Is this an issue? Do we have this everywhere? And yes, we do. So part of my dissertation work was studying emotional intelligence and child welfare practice. And I did this across the state of Ohio. I sectioned off Northeast, all corners of the state of Ohio and Central, and was able to survey about 6 agencies and about 100 people on their intent to stay and leave child welfare practice, and like what the characteristics were, why did they want to, and then also the emotional intelligence level of directors, supervisors, and caseworkers. And so I'm going to ask you guys a question. What do you think the emotional intelligence, this was my hypothesis, is I really thought that those that had higher emotional intelligence would be people that had been on the job a long time, and that those that were in like director and supervisor positions would have higher emotional intelligence. What do you think? Would you support that hypothesis or no? And why?
Can you hear
I'd
me?
like to take that.
Can you hear me okay?
I can't hear you very well, Aaron, no.
What if I talk louder?
It's a little better.
Okay. So I'm gonna say no, because it just depends on the person's empathy and sympathy. You can do a job for I don't know how many years and not have empathy, I guess, but some person that has a bunch of empathy can only work for like a year and show that they care about their job and care about other people. So
Nice. Nice insight. Thank you. Anyone else? What are your thoughts? I'm definitely curious what Martha thinks because she also studies emotional intelligence. What are your thoughts, Martha?
well, Erin kind of stole my thunder there. She did really good with what she was saying, but I have to look at it as I'd have to have studied the people and look to see, what backgrounds they come from, what
Yeah.
kind of emotional intelligence training did they even have, because, that's virtually unheard of, and many people pick up empathy by seeing others or by what they learned as growing up. So
Yep.
I'm interested to hear how all this came out.
Yes.
I'm fascinated.
Yeah, and because there were very, very limited, actually there were none, no tests that were done using the Mesquite Emotional Intelligence Assessment, which is the one that I used, an ability-based emotional intelligence score. It was not used in child welfare practice before. So I started just with a correlational study, so not accounting for prior. I did ask a question about prior EI, but really not accounting, for that as a major variable. I just wanted to initially see the differences and if it warranted further investigation. And what I did find was that directors had the lowest emotional intelligence, then supervisors, and then the front line had the most. And then those that intended to leave child welfare practice had even higher emotional intelligence. So then I started thinking, well, maybe, because the average rate of employment was also 2 years of employment in child welfare practice, that maybe it had to do with the fact that certain types of emotions are more conducive for doing that type of work. And so it just kind of, reinforces people to stay in that profession. But then, unfortunately, I started to really see some of the dysfunctional problems in our systems and in child welfare practice, and not dealing with emotions, and repressing emotions, and not, being able to manage them effectively. I examined rural areas as well as urban areas. And which one do you think had higher EI among the groups?
I would think rural. I have no idea. I don't know much.
That's
about this
okay.
stuff, but I would say rural.
Okay, Jade, tell me why.
I don't really know why. I just feel like I come from a rural area and I feel like I don't know much about different cultures and different I don't know much because of that, because I did come from a smaller town compared to larger towns. You get more immersed in that.
So it was actually really interesting because there are different ways to measure emotional intelligence, and with the scale that I used, there's what's called experiential emotional intelligence, and strategic. And so those coming from more urban settings were able to manage their emotions better and understand them, but those from rural areas were able to perceive them and use them better. And so overall, if you looked at the overall score, there weren't like drastic differences, but rural area was able to, really be able to manage things differently. And the reason I thought possibly why is because there was a study that was done about small organizations having relationship at its core for building resiliency through trauma. And rural areas do have very small networks of individuals that can buffer through some traumatic emotions, whereas in urban settings, individuals are coming and going a lot more, and those relationships don't form in the same ways. And so there could be many reasons, right? But regardless, there were differences. I don't know what those differences exactly are because it was just a correlation, but it does lend some credence to the reason behind my conceptual framework of the work that I do now. And so I wanted to give you that underpinning so that you understand what I'm about to present to you now. So that led into an entire body of work on really studying systems and organizations and understanding emotion in an organization. So kind of like organizational psychology a little bit. And I started working in Cleveland in an area called Lakewood at a satellite campus that we had for the University of Akron during the time of around 2014 when Tamir Rice was murdered by police officers in Cleveland, Ohio. And this led into a major uprising in Cleveland, especially examining police brutality and our police structure. And it also permeated all of our health and human service agencies as well, because this was a child. Tamir was only 12 years old. And so I really started getting into Black Lives Matter through my Unitarian Universalist church. And we started doing what was called anti-racist, anti-oppressive, and multicultural organizing to challenge systemic racism and oppression inside all of our systems of care. Because when you really start to pull away the layers of, why we have so much dysfunction in our systems, there is this thing called white supremacy thinking and characteristics that really permeate everything that we do in our processes. And if you're working with people and you're trying to, promote health and healing, this type of thinking is traumatic. It produces trauma, and it produces isolation, competition, a lack of equity, a lack of inclusion. And I truly believe that this is the issue, the major issue that we have going on in every institution. And you can see it politically now in our communities. Pretty much everything that's going on is from this problem. So when I came here to Indiana State University last year, my first course of action was to examine the child welfare system. So what I want to do before I get into, giving you some information about white supremacy culture and white privilege and white fragility, I want to show you some of the statistics about Indiana. So I'm going to share my screen now, and Lily, if you could help me, just let me know if you're able to see my screen. Hold on one second. I don't see it coming up. I'm looking for it. Hold on one moment. Let me see if I can do something else here.
I hovered over the share the screen on mine, Dr. McCollister, and it says if you press Alt S, it should let you share it. And
Okay. I think it's there. Can everyone see it, or you just give me a thumbs up? Sweet, thank you. So this was something that I started last semester as part of what was called the Leadership Institute in the College of Health and Human Services. And it was about really trying to raise cultural awareness with individuals that provide health and human services to families and children using this impact model of an anti-racist, anti-oppressive, and multicultural framework. And so these are all the systems of care that I examined, and mainly child services, but also youth services, mental health, family and child services, and education. And this is what I found. Indiana is 48th in the nation for child maltreatment and 47th for foster care. When we look at juvenile detention, they're 43rd. Indiana and Kentucky are more than double the national average. And when we look at this area specifically, we're in the moderate high region for abuse and neglect rates. And of a five state radius, Indiana's double the rate in foster care. And that is home to Chicago, Illinois, Detroit, Michigan, Cincinnati, Ohio, Louisville, Kentucky. So we have like double the rate of kids going into foster care. And what do we know about foster care? Does anybody have any thoughts about the foster care system? So there's a lot of debate about the foster care system and what it actually, does for children. And because there's so much, trauma that children are experiencing for whatever reason, it could be, just simply, experiencing domestic violence in the home or substance use or, some type of, addiction or mental health issue, like a coexisting problem. Regardless, we do know that, it is extremely traumatic for a child to be removed from their family. And what we have noticed is disproportionality is a major issue. So there are a lot of Black and children of color that are put into the foster care system disproportionately. And those same children are in our educational system lacking help and support and are easily targeted for suspensions and expulsions more. And it is contributing to what's called the prison pipeline. And so this disproportionality problem that we have requires us to do a collective-wide community impact. We have to come together in all of our social service agencies to address the same problem and concern so that we can be preventative. And right now we work in silos, which means that every institution is separate. But I just want to show you some of these statistics. When we look at infant mortality rates among Black mothers, chronic experiences of race discrimination are associated with poorer birth outcomes. Indiana specifically, infants are more likely to die in their first year than those in 42 other states, and Black infants more than twice as likely. How many of you have heard of adverse childhood experiences? And if you have, what are they? And I know some of the social work students have heard of these. What are adverse childhood experiences?
I'm throwing out one thing. It could be environmental, it could be physical, it could be, okay, that's all. Leave it to the students after that.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Irving.
Kind of like traumatic events.
Yeah, can you think of some examples of traumatic events that kids might go through?
Like neglect from their parent, like
Yep,
Yeah, neglect.
Yep. Yeah.
Um, I'm trying to think of some more, but them are the
That's
main
okay.
two that's in my head.
That's good, Emma. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Aaron?
Verbal and emotional abuse.
Absolutely. So in the 1990s, the end of the 1990s, Dr. Vincent Folletti did a study called the Adverse Childhood Experience Study. And he was a doctor that was studying obesity. And what he found was that of the individuals that had, the highest obesity rates, they also had the highest adverse childhood experiences rate. And so he came up with this scale. And it was determining all these different adverse childhood experiences, and I believe that there's about 11. And so one would be experienced divorce, from their parent, raised by a single parent. A parent was incarcerated. A parent suffered addiction with a substance. A parent, had a mental health problem. The child witnessed domestic violence. So this all related to my work in child welfare. And so when we started to look at these ACE scores, what we saw was that if you had 4 or more of those, you had an earlier onset of death. And not only did that relate to some of the things that you brought up, it related to a person's, biological health, their psychological health, their social health, their ability to interact, their emotional health, right? And also it impacted spiritually and culturally, because then we started seeing disproportionality. And so we saw here in Indiana that nearly half, 47.3% of Hoosier youth have experienced 1 or more ACE. And then when we look at Black youth, nearly twice as likely to experience 2 or more. And like I said, if we get to 4 or more, there's an earlier onset of death. Hoosier youth have a higher prevalence than their peers nationally in 8 out of the 9 ACEs, as measured by the National Survey of Children's Health. And then those that live in poverty are 3 times more likely to have 2 or more ACEs than their peers at or above 400% of the poverty line. So what does that mean to you? What do you think that means? These statistics are just astounding. What do you think the call to action is?
I would say that we really need to analyze our systems specifically here and break down where we're failing.
Very good, Abby, yes. And so let me give you some of those systems. So in child maltreatment, disproportionality between Black and multiracial children. So in our child welfare, in our foster care, we see disproportionality. So higher percentages of Black youth are found in the foster care system disproportionately than white youth. In our juvenile justice system, this is where it is really a large disproportionality between youth committed and youth in Indiana, between white and Black. It's actually reversed, if you can see that. Mental health systems, 49th out of the 50 states in per capita spending on public health, like smoking, drug addiction, and obesity. And Indiana children face all of these major challenges: substance abuse, lack of mental health, inadequate insurance, poor health, and suicide ideation. And we are 2nd out of 34 in students who made a suicide plan. When you look at the suicide ideation, suicide is the 2nd leading cause of death for youth 15 to 24 in Indiana. And insufficient mental health screening, poor access to mental health services, and resistance to seeking care because of fear of using the healthcare system because of discrimination, systemic racism, and oppression. And then when we look at the major disparities, LGBTQ kids are 3 times more likely to consider suicide and 5 times more likely to attempt it. And then females are twice as likely to consider suicide as males. And then younger youth and youth of color are also more likely sorry, I can't read what that says, more likely. It looks like maybe to attempt suicide. So I'm going to stop there. What are your thoughts about that? I know that's heavy, and that's why I gave you a disclaimer before I started tonight. Did you know this about Indiana? Are you a resident of Indiana? And, you know, even if you're not, if you're in the 5-state radius of here, right, it's impacting you. Is this surprising? Aaron?
I'm going to jump in and say no. During my senior year of high school, my high school actually had 3 suicides in the same year. Yeah, so that's why I'm saying it's not surprising. And also, I've had a lot of family members that are from Indiana and live in Indiana also have committed suicide. So this does not surprise me at all.
Thank you for sharing. Anyone else?
I'm not from Indiana. I'm from Wisconsin, so kind of nearby, kind of not though. And I've been here for about a year. And for what I've like compared to Wisconsin and Indiana and being an OT in OT school, it doesn't surprise me too much just of like how my professors talk and like what I've heard. But the numbers are a lot larger than Wisconsin.
Yes.
Sure, like I didn't have like what Aaron was saying in school, like no one committed suicide in my school when I went to high school. So
thank you for sharing, Jade. Anyone else?
I would say I'm from Southern Illinois, and I totally agree with the statement when you said that those kind of things kind of trickle outwards to the neighboring states, because we didn't have as many suicide incidents, but I know that there were a lot of attention drawn to students who were attempting suicide or were talking about it, things like that.
Right. Thanks, Lily. Okay, so thank you all for sharing. So what I concluded was the same things that all of you have really discussed and talked about, and that is just this need for intervention and understanding that, you know, it takes different ways of solutions to address this problem. And when I started to look at, you know, just here in Vigo County, and I showed you those statistics that we're in a high moderate area of some of these factors, you have to examine what the culture is like in a rural environment. And in a rural environment, there's a lot of dual relationships. There's a lot of, you know, individuals who are in power, who have been in power a long time. There's very specific culture that, you know, you have to build transformational leadership around. So it starts very slow. It's a very process-oriented thing. It's not something that'll happen overnight. And I started to examine the emotional intelligence piece that I was talking about with what's called a relational cultural model to be transformational in relationships. And this leads me to the next part of my presentation, and that is talking about white supremacy culture and white supremacy thinking. And what you will find across our nation is that this type of culture and this type of thinking permeates all of our systems, and it is very prevalent in rural areas across the nation. So I'm going to stop that PowerPoint, and before I move on to the next one, are there any questions so far, any thoughts? So the students that are on the call, you have seen this before. We've went over this. So now you understand the front half of the presentation, because I did not share that part with you, but I did share this part with you. And so, yes, I will be expecting that you will answer some questions, right? And I see you smiling, Abby, so. So what we, you know, what a lot of what I do in the classes is I teach a human behavior and social environment course, and it is a macro course. And I teach other macro social work courses. And I've identified the problems in our systems to be disproportionality, to be systemic racism and systemic oppression, and this need to be what's called anti-racist, anti-oppressive, and more multicultural to address these issues. And you have to dismantle the way that we are doing our processes and practice to be able to, heal the trauma that is going on inside of our systems of care. And so that leads me to these two topics, which are white privilege and white fragility, and why there is so much struggle around, really trying to make major changes in our systems of care so that, we can address all of these concerns that I brought up previously. So these are some of the characteristics, and what I want you to do is, if you have a piece of paper, just take out a piece of paper and just look at the characteristics and, give me an example of a couple of them that you've done before. And then just so you know, because all of us are in systems, and we're in a system right now, a university system, and, you don't have to, you can be any race, ethnicity, to participate in white supremacy culture and white supremacy thinking. And because we are in a system right now, such as a university, we have contributed to these things in some way. So take out a piece of paper and just kind of give me your top 3, and you can rank them if you want, and an example of how you may have done each one of those. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of time to really kind of process this. So I'll give you a few minutes here.
I'm not trying to sound ignorant, but can I listen to other people before I say mine? Because I don't really know if I understand these quite yet.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, however you want to. Yeah, if there's any one of them that, you might interpret in your own way, that's fine too.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, how are we doing? Do we have some examples? Who would like to share?
I would say my biggest one is sense of urgency. Like when I want to do something, like I want to do it now, when that shouldn't be the case a lot of times. And definitely perfectionism with stuff like school and things. So those are definitely my main 2.
Thanks, Alexis. Who else would like to share?
My number 1 would be perfectionism. So like on an exam or an assignment, if I even miss one, I just beat myself up over just missing that one. And then I have 2, fear of open conflict, or I'm the only one, which I'm the only one I feel is more like derogatory towards myself. because I am a mom of 4 kids, and sometimes it seems like I'm the only one in the bachelor's program that is in my 30s and still pursuing my education.
Thanks, Catherine. Would anyone else like to share?
I will. Mine is like your progress over your outcome. Our systems are set up to just, value whatever the outcome of something is, where in reality, if you slow down a little bit more, the process is just as important, if not more.
Thanks, Abby. Any other thoughts? Okay, so this might help, Erin. So perfectionism is unattainable. And actually for the human condition, we don't learn best that way. We actually learn best by doing and not exactly getting it right the first time, but honing our craft and adding to it and making it, better as we go. So more process oriented. We are more process oriented as human beings. So perfection is actually not exactly attainable. But perfectionism is also like, has anyone ever felt really uncomfortable if they didn't get an A? How about like if you got an A plus and then an A minus? How does the A minus feel? Does it feel different?
Now I'm thinking of when I take a class and I have a B minus, but I'm like this close away from getting it B, like a regular B or something. So that's
right.
When I think of perfectionism now.
Right. And what do we really know about grades in the real world? Is there anything that really is that we're graded on like that?
They don't define who we are.
We're not graded that way in real life, but yet we are on assignments. So it does set us up to want perfection and miss the point of learning, miss the point of the story, miss the point of the process. And I've noticed this over the 15, well, it's actually longer now that I've been teaching, is students more and more caring about what the grade is and not so much like the material. And not everyone, of course, but there is a trend that I've seen. The sense of urgency is just the world we live in, instant gratification. We want what we want and we want it right now. And we don't want to wait. And then if we are called out for any kind of mistake that we made, oftentimes people get very defensive, yet we're human and we're going to make lots of mistakes all the time. Quantity over quality, this is, really focusing on having more versus the quality of what we actually have. Worship of the written word means, basically, if it's not written down, it doesn't exist. And so there's a question of, why do we have so many individuals in academia writing papers when everything that we do out in the world has so much to do with our engagement? And why isn't there more focus on engaging and emotional intelligence and how we treat one another? But we have this very, worship of the written word versus how are we talking and communicating with one another? And do we care about one another? Where are we measured on empathy? Only one right way. Oftentimes people want to know absolutes. Just tell me the answer. What is the answer? And so many times when you're working with human beings, what do we know? Like, there are multiple answers. We don't always know the right way. Paternalism means that you have individuals that may have power over you, that watch everything you're doing and don't, like, it would be like a micromanager that doesn't give you autonomy and freedom, to learn and make mistakes on your own. Either or thinking is, all or nothing, either one way or the other. Power hoarding, which is about competition. We see this a lot with competition for funding for different universities. Fear of open conflict, not being able to disagree and not be emotionally defensive about that. Individualism versus working collectively. How many of you love working in groups and doing group work? Lily loves it. I do too.
No, I like working in a group when it's MSP, so Martha and Dr. E, don't be upset. But if it's a class assignment, I like working by myself.
Yes, right. So in the culture, individualism is rewarded over the collective in the group. But yet when we get out into the world, we have to know how to work with a group. And a lot of, individuals will choose to work on their own. And that kind of does, a disservice, because you're losing the skills of engaging with other people. I'm the only one. How many of you have ever done this one when you're in a group? And you kind of just take the lead and take over. Because if you want it done the right way, you'll do it. Right? And then progress is bigger or more. And objectivity over subjectivity. And how many of you have ever done like a research class? And you've heard of quantitative research versus qualitative, right? Our whole world is run by quantitative research, which means that we predict a behavior and then we study it. And qualitative is subjective, meaning it's the lived experience of an individual. Well, there's this thing that's basically called, when we measure somebody, it changes the outcome. When you're being videoed or you're being measured, are you authentic, like 100% yourself? No, you're not. You don't show up as your true authentic self. And so it's very hard to be objective with human beings. And really, it all comes down to relativity of the person's experience. And so person's narrative is extremely important. And we've gotten away from people's narratives, like what makes them who they are, where did they come from, what is their culture, what is their ideology, their belief system, because this is what motivates people to do, great things. And then the right to comfort is just that those that are in power have a very hard time being confronted, and defensiveness will come, and this need to be comforted and not talk about an issue. But the person that's in power has, this ability to walk away and say, I don't want to deal with this right now, while those that are not in power, are suffering from the oppression of it. So I have this quote here by Dr. Martin Luther King. Never forget that everything Hitler did in Germany was legal. What do you think about that quote? Of all of the characteristics that I brought up, and I'm not trying to make a correlation, to Hitler here, but just the concept of not knowing what the tentacles of white supremacy thinking can do. What are the thoughts that are brought up with this quote?
It makes me think of critical race theory and the reason why we have scholars in it, and the reason why we challenge the systems and in place right now, because they're not always equal, equitable to every race and every body, and they affect different people differently.
Excellent, Lily. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. So I'm going to share kind of like my story about how this affected me. My doctorate's in nonprofit management, and part of what I wanted to do was, to be in leadership and try to take all of these different concepts, that I had learned and, try to run a nonprofit. That was always my dream, to run a nonprofit organization. And when I was first beginning in the process, being a white woman in nonprofit, because of privilege, and because of all of those white supremacy characteristics that I just brought up, it was part of the culture that I was privileged in, meaning that I grew up around perfectionism being something that was taught, that individualism, was something fostered, and I did very well at. Being very objective, being very competitive, being very scientific and research oriented, like, quantity over quality, and a sense of urgency, meaning that I could get things done very quickly, very fast. But when I showed up in nonprofit, these are the different things that not only I experienced, but I could also see as a trend happening. So this disavowal of power, so not really being able to own power, and not being able to delegate power, an obsession with thinking of the future, not being in the present. So that's that process part over outcome. What's called performative racism, anti-racist work, which means that, you may say that you're anti-racist and performing anti-racism, but actually not changing the structure of the organization. So not practicing it. Over-delivering, overworking. A lot of white supremacy culture is doing too much with little resources. Being extremely polite, so like repressing of emotion, and confusing informal network with equity. And this is how it showed up in my work. I was a perfectionist, thinking my way was the best way because I had studied it and it was what the research said to do. So that led to either or thinking, and then a concentration on what's called power hoarding. And power hoarding isn't like I had power and I was like keeping it away, but it was like I was competitive and wanted to be number one. And that my goal and pursuit was to be the best at everything that I wanted to be. And I didn't realize how bad that actually was, because it didn't really, it wasn't the, shining in your moment of skill or talents or whatever. But when that becomes the sole motivation, and that shows up in your work, it no longer becomes the mission, it becomes ego-driven. Right to comfort, including fear of open conflict. So I was very afraid to confront people about what I was seeing. So I wasn't owning my power at all. I was what was called a people pleaser, and very individualized, so very much concerned of my own meter, like competing with myself all the time. So I never felt good enough, nothing ever was good enough to my standards. And then this progress is bigger, more. What I found at the end of all of that is like, I never truly was happy with my performance. Like I could do better. And all of that changed. And this is the next activity that I would like to do with each one of you. And if you still have that piece of paper out, what I want you to do is to rate yourself here. And this is how it goes. Part of the characteristics on the left-hand side are white supremacy cultural characteristics, and part of the characteristics on the right-hand side is anti-racist cultural characteristics. Where are you at right now? And you just kind of put a little slash, next to which one you are more like. So for the first one, if you're in an organization, are you a person that tends to not want to rock the boat? So meaning like if something's going wrong, we have systemic racism or systemic oppression, or we have, people that might not be adhering to policy, or you guys are students, right? So, say this is group work. How many of you are comfortable with telling your group members, hey, you're not doing, equal work with all of us, what's going on? Or are you, comfortable giving that kind of feedback? The next one is, I value intellect, data, and facts, or I value intuition, emotion, and senses. The next one is, I choose comfort, or I tolerate or embrace discomfort as a way to grow. The next one is, I feel a sense of urgency and a need to fix. Now, this happens a lot with our social workers. It's called savior, this need to rescue and save people. Or I like to slow down and see how conversations or initiatives evolve. The next one is, I'm thick-skinned and competitive, or I'm able to be vulnerable and cooperative. The next one is, I tend to judge people who feel differently, or I tend to be curious about other people's perspectives. I prefer absolutes, or I'm comfortable with ambiguity. And what that means is, tell me the right answer, or, well, guess what? There is no right answer. Next one, I find I value outcome and finished product, or I just value the process of doing something. I tend to blame others when tension erupts, or I tend to look at myself, my own role. How did I contribute? And the last one, I care most about individual status, or I care most about the group's function and how well the group is. Okay. Who would like to be vulnerable? All of us, right? We love being vulnerable. Would anyone like to share?
I'll share. I don't have a problem sharing. But while I was going through them, I tended to be in the middle. I'm not on either. So that's where I was going. I judge, it just depends on who, what, and when, I think, in some of these cases. Because I definitely value outcome finished products, but I want people to take part in it. So I value the process too. I'm like in the middle, almost all the way down. So I'm just a tad bit raised. I don't know. I'm working it out. I don't know.
Well, like I said before, we are all in an institution. And so it is more about, walking the middle path and trying to get more towards an anti-racist framework, an anti-oppressive framework. It's not like going completely to one side or the other, you know what I mean? Like coming from this side and going completely to the other side. It's really trying to value all processes and how they show up, and given the scenario situation at hand. Anyone else want to share?
I feel similar to Doc E. I feel they're more in the middle, but really leaning to the anti-racist culture, because I feel like in Black culture, a lot of times we are taught to trust our senses and to feel things a little bit more than the people around us. Kind of like read the room kind of mentality all the time. And so you really do go along with the vibe that is in the area or in the environment when you do more individual.
You were muted again.
Anyone else want to add? You want to add something, Abby?
Yeah, I can. So I actually started learning about this last semester. I was definitely more towards more of the white supremacy thinking. That's how I was raised. That's our values being in a smaller town. However, I have started to analyze a lot of these things and how it affects my life and my mental health. And now I can see those things in people around me. And I would say I'm more like half and half at this point. And it's something I'm glad I'm educated on, because I want to educate others about it, and because it's what we're doing now is not healthy for anybody. So.
And the other really good point that I have brought up before, I think with the class, is there are 8 different intelligences. Howard Gardner brought this up in the 1980s. We are largely, in our institutions, especially in academia, focused on logic intelligence. But there are many different types of intelligences. And if you judged, and I forget who said this quote, but if you judge a fish by how well it can climb a tree, what's going to happen to the fish? Right? The fish absolutely can't climb the tree, and so there's no way that they can even be measured on intelligence, because it's the scale that's the problem. It's not the fish. Here's another way of thinking of it. If a flower doesn't bloom, whose fault is that? Is it the flower's fault? What's the problem?
The environment.
Yeah, because you have to look at all the variables. You have to look at is it a flower that needs sun and it's in the shade? Does it need more nutrients? Does it need different soil? Some plants need talked to. You got to talk to them, and you got to spritz them. Just like your shirt, right, Abby?
Yes.
You got to spritz them. So when we think about the different ways in which people show up in their intelligence, intrapersonal is emotional intelligence, social emotional learning. There's navigational intelligence, which is about people that can really understand the earth and how to navigate the earth and use and give back to the earth. There are intelligences of the body, kinesthetic. Those are individuals who are athletes. We have music intelligence, visual and artistic intelligence, linguistic intelligence. But yet our world in white supremacy culture is based highly on very specific language and logic. And when you think about that, and you look at these different aspects that are on the right-hand side, it's very subjective, right? Which would be away from logic. But everyone's life is subjective to them. It's relative to them. And so as a social worker, I have to take the person in the environment, just like I take that flower. Each flower is different. And you can't expect a fish to climb a tree, because they're not going to. So I want you to take a look at this. So for some people, and for privileged society, largely white individuals, when we look at our systems of care and everything that I'm talking about here, there are all of these different issues and problems and fences and obstacles that many Black and people of color, those that are disabled, those that have mental health impacts, and the intersectionalities of all of those things are faced with a lot more circumstances than others. And there's been a lot of talk about equity and inclusion. And so what do you notice in the pictures that's different? One of these is not like the other. So what's different in the picture? For example,
When you take away the barrier, the wall.
yeah. Hi, Catalin.
Hi, I'm so happy to see you.
I'm so happy to see you too. Former student from the University of Akron, years ago, years and years and years ago. So when we look at the barriers, you know, we're taught equity and inclusion as part of what, you know, we need to do right now to address systemic racism and systemic oppression. And we use a lot of words in social work like empower people. But when I say empower, doesn't that suggest that I have power? That I'm going to empower you? And so when you think about that, then that already is contributing to white supremacy culture. If I am a person of privilege, you know, and I've had certain social, political, and economic, you know, advances because of the culture in which, you know, is dominant in society and receiving so much, you know, benefit around that culture, it suggests that I would have more power than someone else. And so when we try to use equity and inclusion, unless we truly embody it authentically, genuinely, and believe in equity, then what we have here are, you know, almost like Band-Aids, right, to a system that's broken. When really what we want to do is liberate, meaning that there are no barriers, that everyone can just show up as they are, who they are. They don't have to be someone different. The fish doesn't have to be the dog, right? Or who climbs the tree better, a cat, right? The fish can just be the fish and doesn't need to climb the tree because the measurement isn't about the tree, right? The fish just exists as they are, who they are, and they show up as a whole entity. So this is our first little game. And what I want you to do is the first person to say bingo is going to receive a prize. So bingo can be achieved by to the right, to the left down, diagonal, and backwards diagonal. So whoever has bingo first, just say bingo.
It's Mary. Bingo.
Hi, Mary.
Hello, Scala. I love this
Hello.
presentation. You're doing a great job.
Thank you, Mary. Would you like to share with us your bingo?
Sure. I think I have a standard accent. Standard accent, no criminal record, human. I think I'm tall for a woman, 5'7". I don't know what I don't know what tall is for women. I don't know if you meant 6 feet or over. Mentally healthy.
Great, wonderful. So you receive our first prize. And yes, there are prizes that we are giving away tonight. I do want to save, I think we have 3 prizes. I'm going to save our grand finale prize for the end, but you will receive a little goodie basket, Mary. And
yay!
Thank you so much for participating and being our first participant in one of our games here. And for the rest of you, I want you to just take a look at this and think about if life were like this, which it is, right? A bingo game, and there were prizes that were given away. What if these prizes, you know, were, you know, a lifetime of insurance, a lifetime of pension, you know, a lifetime of an education? What would happen to all the other individuals here that couldn't even say bingo? Was there anyone that couldn't say bingo? And does that make them less of a person because they could not say bingo? So when we think about white supremacy culture, the competition that we have on human life, is this really fair? And if we look back to equity and inclusion, right? And I don't know how to get my screen back to where it was, hold on. We look back, is this really fair? Right? The goal is liberation. Because in liberation, we don't even have a bingo game. So how many of you have heard of Robin DiAngelo in the book White Fragility? If you haven't read the book, highly recommend it. It's a really good book. And she explains a lot about, you know, our system and understanding white supremacy culture. And what she means by white fragility is this mental state to which even a minimum amount of racial stress becomes intolerable and then like will trigger defense mechanisms. So anger, fear, guilt, behaviors such as that defensiveness of argumentation, and even like shutting down, like silence and leaving a situation because they have, you know, the right to comfort, not wanting to even partake in a conversation. In America, white people live in a society that protects them from race-based stress. As a result, white people get to set expectations for racial comfort, in which turn lowers their tolerance for racial stress. And I want you to just think for a moment, what was most uncomfortable to you in the past, or, you know, even now, about discussing race, and why is it so uncomfortable to talk about? And when did you notice, like, the first time that talking about race was uncomfortable? Or is it uncomfortable?
I mean, for me, it's always just been I don't want, like, it's the fear of conflict. I just don't want to offend anyone. Like,
right.
Just
the fear of open conflict, which was one of those white supremacy characteristics, yes. Yep. What else?
Hi.
Hi, Catalin.
Hi. So I will say, growing up, I'm American Indian. Growing up, my mom always had really, you know, dark, straight black hair. My mom's darker complected. So there was always a sense of, you know, your mom's different than mine. But it was always uncomfortable for me to realize that it was because I was American Indian. I mean, it was, I guess, easier to excuse it to say, well, we're poor. You know, that's why you don't like me. It's because I'm poor. It can't be because, you know, how my mom looks or who we are.
Right.
So that's where, as a young child, that's where I started to see the difference. That is because, you know, you look different, obviously, but you don't want to think that that's what it is, because you can't control that. Like, I can't change how my mom looks. Maybe at some point I won't be poor, but I can't change how I look.
That's a really good point, Catalin. Thank you for bringing that up. Anyone else?
It gets uncomfortable for me when it comes to my ignorance on different races. I didn't really know anything about Black culture until I started coming to Indiana State University, because I am from a small town what is primarily white, and I kind of get uncomfortable when I talk to my friends and ask them, like my African and Black friends, about like stereotypes within the Black culture and stuff. I don't ask my questions because I'm trying to be rude. I ask them because I want to know, so I can like correct myself if I ever do those biases or stereotypes. But most of my friends are usually understanding when I ask them that, because I don't want to offend them. And also, I think it was my junior year, I took a African American Studies class, and I kept telling myself, like, don't be uncomfortable because there's many white people who take these classes. But there was only me and like two other white people, and the rest were African American or Black. So it made me feel uncomfortable there as well. But I just don't want Black people or African American people to think that I am trying to be rude, I guess. So. You're muted.
Anyone else? Thanks, Erin.
I would say I didn't really experience any racial sensitivity growing up until I started moving around in different towns. My hometown is very mixed race in the sense that our high school is not predominantly white or black. It's a good even quantity of both. And so there was no like real tension about like who was black or who was white and what rules applied to who and who they didn't apply to. You've seen like the sometimes the basic stereotypes being tossed around, but not much more than that. And to a predominantly white area, and then that expression is so direct and so blunt.
Hello?
Sorry, that was me. I was muted. So this poses the question, why is white fragility such a challenge? And again, this concept of white fragility, is correlated with understanding this culture of hierarchy, understanding a culture of competition, understanding a culture of individualism versus collective, this culture of objectivity versus subjectivity. So when white people react this way, it centers them in a conversation about race and racism, which really should be about, the victim, and that is Black and people of color that are victim to a systemic issue of racism and a systemic issue of intersectionality and oppression. White fragility allows white people to not be held accountable for their actions, and it places this thing called intent over impact. It allows white people to govern when and how race can be discussed or racism discussed, because it's out of sight, out of mind. If white individuals don't even see that white culture is a race, that being white is a race, then, and there are these privileges for being white, then there is no reason to address it because there's no, it's not affecting individuals, that are white. And so the intent over impact is, okay, well, examples of this, I didn't mean to do that, you took it the wrong way. I didn't intend to, make a race-based statement or a microaggression, you misinterpreted what I said. It also allows white people to govern when and how race and racism are discussed. I said that, and then it reinforces the equilibrium and upholds white supremacy characteristics in the thinking that governs the institutions of power. And so it like perpetuates it and allows very abusive and traumatic ways of being, doing, seeing, and thinking to exist without ever being checked. And if you really think about it, the white supremacy culture, the white fragility, which is all based in these defense mechanisms of fear, right? It actually looks like the same characteristics of abuse, right? Or an abuser, if you want to individualize it. So the intent over impact is actually gaslighting. And gaslight is, that's not what I meant, you're taking it the wrong way. So when somebody says that to you, right, if you kind of confront somebody, say you're in a relationship with another person and you're upset by something that they may have done in the relationship, and you say, that really hurt me, and they were like, well, that's not what I meant, and you're taking it the wrong way. How does that feel? you just completely feel invalidated. So nobody has, even addressed that a concern, was brought up. Gaslighting is, something that is called crazy making, meaning that you may question yourself, like, was what I heard what I heard? The individual versus paternalism is a strong sense of self-importance and ego with a feeling of entitlement. Those that have privileges and power have always had privileges and power, and so there is this sense of entitlement and ego around that, not even being aware of other ways of being and doing and thinking. And then only one right way, or I am the only one, is part of arrogance and lacking empathy. Now, I contributed to every single one of these things. When I was coming up in academia and in the university, there were so many things I didn't know, and I would say very innocently, right? That's not what I meant. You're taking it the wrong way. Not even realizing how abusive that statement was. I was a very ego-driven person, and I want to say ego as in I had to excel. Everything that was important to me, I had to get straight A's. I remember getting my first A- and was devastated at this. And then also being somewhat arrogant, having a little bit of a chip on my shoulder, like, if I'm in a group, I guess I'm going to take the lead because I know I'm going to be the one that sees this through, right? Well, the greater the power, the more dangerous the abuse, right? There's the quote that absolute power corrupts absolutely. And because it's not about power, right, or power hoarding. And if we truly do value humanity and everyone and people and what they bring, and, in my profession, we value the strengths of every individual, then all of that thinking is a very abusive way of being, thinking, doing, and produces trauma. So this is how we avoid these things. And this is something that I started to do over the past decade of my life, but really the story I shared with you earlier, when I started to do anti-racism work in Cleveland after Tamir Rice was murdered, and really understanding and seeing what the hell was wrong with our system that I was oblivious to because it didn't pertain to me. I was a white privileged, social worker that, saw the issues, but absolutely did not understand systemic racism and systemic oppression. But then when I finally saw it, these are the things that came up for me that I remind myself to do and be every single day, because this is a process, because we are all a part of it and we have to unlearn it. So we have to remind ourselves that there is no such thing as reverse racism. There just is racism, because white is a race, black is a race, brown, people of color. There's no such thing as colorblindness. I mean, there is, but it doesn't have to do with race. Colorblind is actually a biological thing. There's colorism. Race is not always overt, and due to the racist society that we live in, we're all capable of it, and there's internal racism. Simply speaking about race is not racist, and oftentimes when we talk about race, people become very defensive because, like, saying the words white fragility, saying the word white privilege or white supremacy culture, immediately, what I have found is that people get extremely defensive, specifically white individuals. There is no shame in being wrong, only refusing to learn. And this was a big one for me. I never wanted to be wrong because I was a perfectionist. And of course, I did not want to hear those words, white supremacy, white privilege, because of course I never did that, right? I was never part of that. That's what I thought. Well, I was very much so. And now I have to unlearn it. So these are the things that I do. that help me, when I make a mistake or I'm trying to address systemic racism and systemic oppression. I say, when I make a mistake, thanks for correcting me. I didn't realize that. Or I hadn't thought of it like that. I understand now. I was wrong about that and I've changed my mind. Or I should do some more research before I argue this point. Now, when you are responding this way to something, and maybe you're responding this way to any kind of like major issue or disagreement that we have going on in our systems. How is this different than the other statement that was, I'm sorry you took it that way, that's not what I intended? What's the difference in the feeling?
I would say a sense of consideration and empathy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyone else? So one is really grounded in a more traumatic response, and one is grounded in a more open response, where the conceptual framework is about growing and learning and about process. That growing and learning is a process, that we don't know everything, and we can't be perfect, and that we are going to make mistakes. And the whole point is just being willing, to be vulnerable, because the only way that we can dismantle the system is to put ourselves in it and slowly change and unlearn the behavior. And that's a painful thing. Okay, so the last thing that I really want to touch on is, what can we do to change the narratives? And so I want you to think about, and this is our next little gift, giveaway. I want you to, if you have that piece of paper, if you want to write down, just take a few minutes to think about this. White supremacy thinking characteristics are on the left, and ways that we can agree to change the narratives are on the right. And I want you to commit to changing a couple of these, different things that we participate in. So I'll go through a couple of them here. So in our white supremacy thinking characteristics, it's more about individual and being separated versus being more community and collective. So think about in your institutions, in your life, where you're more individual and separate, and change that to be more collective. So if you're doing more individualized projects in class, stretch out and do a group project. Look at your relationships of all the people around you. Do you have more transactional relationships with people or more transformational relationships? And transactional means if you do this for me, I'll do that for you. Versus transformational, that it's life enhancing. That you accept the person, as they are and not what they can give you. Same with transactional goals versus transformational goals. Are you, pursuing goals in your life that are, if you do this, you get this? Or are you focusing on, like, for example, your education? Like, are you doing it to get the piece of paper? Or are you doing it because it is going to transform you spiritually, intellectually? You're going to build these beautiful relationships with people. Progress is bigger or more versus progress is sustainable and it's quality. The fear of open conflict or growth and learning. Those of you that said, I think it was Aaron Brooklyn, you talked about being afraid, you know, of not knowing something. Could you, you know, change something in your life where you put yourself out there and you grow and learn if you make a mistake? How many of you overwork yourself? How many of you procrastinate, wait till the last minute, get something done? That's part of our culture. We all do this. Lily, where are you looking? You're looking around. We all do it, right? Because it's been part of the culture to, you know, work ethic, work real hard and it'll pay off. Well, it doesn't pay off. It causes more stress. And that causes a breakdown on your body and it's very traumatic. So can you spend more time on yourself and self-care or care for your community where you live, like your neighbor? Like go check on your neighbor and say, hey, you know, how are you doing lately? What is your value of intelligence? Is it only on logic? Can you start to expand your understanding of what intelligence really means? Have this broad appreciation for different types of intelligences? And some of this is internalized. Like I have students that have said, you know, I'm a horrible writer. I'm not smart enough to do this, that, and the other. And I always challenge that, right? Because I'm not the greatest writer either. And, you know, you don't let that stop you. Because there are different ways of being intelligent in this world. The last one is superiority of the written word versus all forms of communication. And like I said earlier, we have this, you know, adherence to this European standard of English that, you know, isn't the only way we communicate. And why is there so much adherence to it and writing, you know, these papers that really actually don't manifest in the same way skill-wise out in the real world, because we actually measured more on the love that we can share with other people and other human beings and how we engage with one another than how well we write a paper. Okay, so who is going to be the first person to share how they're changing narratives in their life?
I'm gonna try to take some more time for self-care because I know I definitely like overwork or procrastinate way too much, and I need to focus a little bit more on myself rather than like stressing over future school projects and stuff.
And that is something that's very hard for you, Brooklyn, because I know that you are a straight A perfectionist type A student.
Yeah.
You place a lot of emphasis on your schoolwork.
I do.
So good. I'm glad that you're thinking about that. So you win our second little prize. Yay. Good job, Brooklyn. Who else is changing narratives in their life?
Hi, I know I'm not part of your class and I'm so sorry, but I love this topic.
Yay, I'm so glad, Catalin.
So I'm going to say, like, I have typically in friendships and relationships been more attracted to minority because that's what I am. So I've not necessarily engaged so much with, you know, for instance, at cheerleading, you know, my daughter does cheerleading. So like other, you know, white parents and, you know, I've kind of just always stayed to myself. And I'm realizing as I'm making more of an effort to become engaging and, you know, have meaningful discussions, not just, you know, how are you today, that the similarities are, you know, it's the same. The struggle is the same, you know, in terms of, you know, parenting and so on and so forth. So it's allowing me to open up a little bit more by letting myself have those meaningful conversations with the ultimate goal to have a ongoing relationship. So not just like,
yes,
you know, oh, how's your husband or whatever. Like I want in 5 years when our kids are still doing cheerleading, I want us to have this meaningful relationship. And that's important for me because I always think of everything has an ultimate goal. You know, what is your goal when you talk to this person? You know, is this just a casual encounter? I don't want that anymore. At you know, my age, I want something more meaningful. And that requires me to be more open.
Wonderful. That's beautiful. Thanks for sharing, Callan. Who else wants to share how they're going to change narratives? Go ahead, Abby.
This is something I'm more actively doing, and I'm going to go with the individualism versus like community. I was terrified to get out into my community until COVID hit really, and then here I am volunteering and just doing, you know, something I'm proud of. And, you know, it's taken a lot of work and a lot of extra time, but it's important. And now I'm seeing the bigger picture of, you know, getting out there. And this is a place I've lived my whole life.
Right.
And I was scared to get out there just because I thought, oh, well, I need somebody with me. But now I'm learning like I'm able. And that's awesome.
And I'm so proud of you too, Abby. So for those of you that don't know, and Dr. Irving knows this, because Dr. Irving spent a lot of time volunteering her efforts in the spring and the summer to Vigo County Mutual Aid. So I want to acknowledge Dr. Irving for all of that. She was amazing in helping this community out. And Abby, we really needed some help in getting the word out to our residents about where the food pantries were, because there was at one time a scarcity of food, and we didn't know which pantry was full, which ones were running out of food, and we just needed an organized way. All I did was reach out to Abby, and she was like, yep, I'll do it. And now she's running a coat drive. So proud of you for taking that on. And
Thank you.
It shows that you really embody the values. So
there's a coat drive this Saturday if anybody has donations. It's at
well, my
Westminster
mom
Village.
donated.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
My mom donated from Ohio. Yes.
Thank you.
That was awesome. So proud of you. Who else is changing narratives?
I'll go ahead. I was gonna say fear of open conflict. I used to be very ignorant with my thinking. I'm gonna say that to the point where I was racist, but I learned that from my parents because they both are. But I then educated myself. I became a gender studies major, and I suggest everyone take at least one gender studies class because it teaches you so much. And I suggest majoring in gender studies too because I feel like I'm a lot more educated now. But also, I'm changing it with growth and learning because I decided to further my education again. So now I'm going to grad school for communication, but I'm specializing in public advocacy because I am for Black Lives Matter like you are. But I don't really know that much about it. I just know the basis of like police brutality and stuff. So I'm hoping that my major really involves Black Lives Matter and I get to learn about it more. And I also want to learn more about LGBTQ history and rights. So I hope I get to learn more about that in my major.
That's awesome, Erin. So proud of you too. Great job with all the work you're doing.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Darlene, how are you going to change narratives?
That's not fair because I was listening to 2 meetings at one time. Well, I just recently by proxy volunteered to help with the new Terre Haute Pride Center, and so that's certainly going to be expanding my narrative.
Absolutely.
Across landscape.
Yes. That's amazing.
I can't think of anything else.
So some growth and learning because it's
Obviously.
a little uncomfortable, right?
I wouldn't say that. I'm actually really excited about it. And really open to learning a lot more in the group that we met with. Seems very open and very generous. So I'm excited to participate.
That's awesome.
Happy to help.
Thank you, Darlene. Okay, any last thoughts or comments? I will open it up to questions now. If you have any thoughts or questions, and I also will give away the last prize after we go through some Q&A here. But any last comments or any questions from any of you?
Hi, this is Mary again. I just wanted to say thank you. I'm going to have to get off the Zoom call. I've got to put my garden to bed this evening, so I got to get out there before the sun goes down. And
absolutely.
So that's one way of my self-care. And then the other thing I just wanted to share is that I'm going to hopefully change the narrative on the Vigo County School Board. I am a candidate. I will be on the ballot for District 1. Everyone will have an opportunity to vote for all of the school board candidates.
Mm-hmm.
You can, and if anybody wants to, hopefully, regardless of who you vote for Vigo County School Board, the bottom line, everyone, is you can contribute to change by voting. Just vote.
Yes. Thank you, Mary. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, you too.
I just want to step in and be a voice for my people, because there's not many people that are there for the Hispanic Latin communities. I'm originally from Panama. I know a lot of people don't know that about me, but we don't even have a race. Somebody in white society decided that we just needed to be an ethnic group many years ago. So I often think, where do we fit on the racism scale when we're not even considered to be a race? So every day I try to get that stronger voice for my people, and Alonda always gets happy because this is one of the first places I've ever been able to speak my native tongue on this campus after all the years I've been here. So be a voice. I encourage everyone, for those who don't have a voice, no matter what level, population, be a voice for your people.
That's wonderful, Martha. Thank you so much for sharing. Absolutely. Anyone else?
I just want to say that I'm really glad that I met you, because well, I think that this event really hits the nail on the head for you, because you're really inspiring, and I am really glad I got to meet you, because you have taught me a lot of things, especially with this presentation. So thank you.
Aw, Erin, thanks. I'm glad I met you too. I'm glad I met all of you. You know, I have a unique relationship, I think, with all of you. Lily, you're the newest. Hi, Lily. Any other thoughts about or changing narratives or? Okay, well, I'm going to wrap up and just basically, well, I got a little chat here. Let's see what it says. Thank you, Melissa. This has been great. Yes, thank you, Martha, so much for joining. So our last gift, this is in keeping with an anti-racist, anti-oppressive, and multicultural, you know, model and framework. I have a hard time giving away prizes because of winning. And I like to look a little bit more towards a collective. So my thoughts are, of everyone who's participated here tonight, who do you think as a collective should get the grand prize, which is, drumroll, a Echo Dot? I would like all of you to give a vote of who do you think participated the most in talking tonight, and you know, really engaging in this community, even though it's digital, that we've had here. Who do you think should we give it to? Ooh, I've got 2 votes for Aaron. Yolanda says, Abby, Aaron, Lily, Jade, do we have enough to give to everyone? Dr. Irving, no, we can only give 1. Who? Any other votes? I think there's like 10, 11 people on the call, so I'm just gonna ask. I'm gonna go around. So we'll start with Lily. Who do you think should get the Echo Dot? Who talked and contributed a lot?
I would say Erin did a great job talking about her personal growth and struggles and how she plans on doing better and changing the narrative. So my vote is for Erin.
Nice. Thanks, Lily. Abby, what do you think?
I was going to agree saying Erin. I think she was honest and vulnerable, and I appreciate that.
Thanks, Abby. How about you, Darlene? What do you think?
I don't know that it would be fair since I was split between 2 important meetings.
Okay.
I remember hearing like Erin's story and some Lily story.
Yes, yes. Brooklyn, how about you? Thoughts?
Erin participated a lot.
Martha?
You know, I have to go with the divine Miss Erin.
Yes, yes.
She did put herself out there in a way that a lot of people wouldn't be willing to do that in front of people that they don't know. And I think that's good learning and growth for her.
Some emotional intelligence out there, Erin.
Very much.
Yeah. You really put yourself out there. You were vulnerable, willing to learn and grow. Candace, what do you think? I don't know, maybe Candace left us. And then Mom and Dad, what do you think? Who do you think talked the most? Erin, I read her lips. Mama, I read your lips. I saw it. So Erin gets the Echo Dot. Good job, Erin. We all in a consensus thought that you really put yourself out there tonight, and I want to thank you for really showing up and committing to changing some of these narratives. And with the position that you're in, you've got a lot of ways that you can do that. So thank you so much, and thank you all for inviting me here and being here and sharing. It did go 2 hours. I had no idea it was going to go 2 hours, but I do appreciate you hanging in there with me, because I know it's hard to hang in on a 2-hour Zoom call, right? So awesome.
Thank you.
You all.
You have been wonderful, and I am pleased to have met you finally. And this went better than I ever imagined, and I thank you for all of that.
Awesome, Lily. Thanks. It's nice to meet you too.
And I am so proud of you.
Oh, Mama, thanks.
You are so good, sweetheart.
I love you, Mama.
I love
Go,
you
Pops,
too.
I love him too.
Here.
Love you, Pops.
You're a lot better than I can imagine.
Nah.
Nah, yes.
Nah.
You're my star.
Oh my goodness. Now you're getting out of hand.
That is so sweet. That is totally sweet.
You've always been our star.
Oh, Mama.
Oh, Mama.
Yeah. I love you.
I love you too.
All right. That concludes.
Okay.
I will see you all later. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.